Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Gemini Brett. I'm really honored to be back here with EA Zoom meetings once again. I clocked this at 1 p.m., but I guess let's update it because it's 1:05 p.m. where I sit at my lockdown and home, Richmond, California. Looks like now we've got the exalted degree of Venus on the rise. And really importantly, the galactic center culminating where I am here on December 4th, 2020, 1:05 p.m. Pacific in Richmond, California. So if we dim the lights on this moment now, we're going to find that Ouroboros of the galactic center where the cosmic serpent bites its own tail, culminating where I am, which is cool. But wherever you are in space and time, it's super nice to connect with you. The last talk I did for EA Zoom meetings actually was about the sun on the cross at the galactic center and the galactic alignments that we're experiencing this time. And we'll experience that again on December 21st, when the sun is there in the mouth of the cosmic serpent. This is a date, of course, that we're very tuned into as astrologers now, because of course, this is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in the first degree of Aquarius. And gosh, so conjunct, it's nearly an occultation. That's going to be something else to see. And I hope it will be for all of us eyes to the sky. I'm going to rewind a week before this time to December 14th. Because though it won't be exact where I am here in Richmond, California, it's actually happening shortly after sunrise where I am. This is the next opportunity for the moon to occult the solar disk. In other words, we are coming on to the time of a solar eclipse. So let's have a look at that chart, and it is, at least according to the numbering system that the astronomers use, it's a total solar eclipse, the 23rd of 72 visits by the Saros or Saros series, numbered 142. So I want to wrap a bit today about how to engage with eclipse charts, not only for the chart of the eclipse itself, but to also look at the family of eclipses it belongs to. And yeah, I guess that asks Mike to go over here. And I guess a little bit about myself, in case you don't know of my work. If you watch EA Zoom meetings regularly, you might, because I've gotten the opportunity and the honor to share here several times now. And many of the opportunities I've had to transmit at EA Zoom meetings have been great opportunities for me personally, just to kind of get some of my work and my thought and my adventures, like, into slides and presented. And many of them actually you can find at my website, which is geminibrett.com. There's an offering page. So like the most recent EA Zoom meeting I presented this year of 2020 around the previous solar eclipse, which was at the June solstice of this year, you can find at my page. That talk was called The Sun on the Cross and the Turning of Ages. So you can find me at geminibrett.com. And my principal thing I like to call sacred astronomy. And the general idea is that astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. It is the poetic breath of nature. And when we get outside, get away from just exploring our craft in the small screens of the computers or paper sheets and get out to the big screen of the living sky, we re-nature astrology. And when we do so, we can remember and the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use. So that's what I'm about. I'm very much a sky guy, and that sure makes me wish I could go on somewhere on Earth to experience this eclipse in totality, because if you've seen one, you kind of instantly become hooked. The first time I saw a total solar eclipse, and still the only time, was in August of 2017, the so-called Great American Eclipse. And that was actually right around the time when I first presented for EA Zoom meetings, where I gave this talk called Joy in Saros, Seeking Light in the Shadow of Eclipse Cycles. So it's fun to have a bit of a, I don't know, anniversary now, maybe, or at least coming back to this topic. Although I'm going to speak a little bit more about how to do this in charts, or like when you're sitting with the client that you're consulting or investigating your own chart, right? So eclipses, of course, are about, I'll use the words of Hermes, the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world, of spirit, soul, and matter, of circle, crescent, and cross, of sun, moon, and earth. There's actually another EA Zoom meetings talk I presented some time ago that you can find at geminibrett.com, which is called Circle, Crescent, and Cross, where I get into expressing some transmissions that I've received regarding these three parts of the philosophy through my study of sacred geometry, which is one of the old sacred sciences, along with sacred astronomy. So one of the great questions about the zodiac is like, why 12? Typically people will say, well, because 12 constellations, but then it's like, well, 12 constellations, even though signs and constellations are very different things, it's an important thing for us to know. But probably because there's 12 moons a year, 12 months a year. And the truth is there's many types of moons. In the Saros series of eclipses, which I want to speak with you about today, it synchronizes 3 of the 4 moons you see here. But I'm going to first just talk about ones that we all should know. All right. So one is the idea of the sidereal month, okay, which I show here in relationship to the earth glyph, because really this is on average the amount of time it takes for the moon to circle the earth. If we use that model, earth about sun, moon about earth, right? In other words, it's moon through the zodiac. Or another way we could say that sidereal of the stars, from Earth's point of view, how long it takes for moon to align with one star back to that same star. On average, that's 27 and a third days. And it's called the Sidereal Month. So here's an example. In December 4th, 2014, 6 years ago from the day I'm recording, happy birthday, Mom. This was a new moon in the first minutes of tropical Capricorn, right? And 27 and a third days later, January 18th, 2015, the moon had by then, between these two dates, circled the zodiac and returned to that same position, 0 degrees and 6 arc minutes of tropical Capricorn. Now, that's not from new moon to new moon, right? Because in that time, the sun has also moved. The sun moves about, on average, 1 degree per day. At this time, the sun's moving particularly fast, actually. And so 27 days after 0, the sun at this time had actually moved 28 degrees, right? So the moon's going to have to travel for a couple more days. Moon moving on average about 13 degrees per day. The moon's going to have to do another 2 days of travel to catch up for the following new moon. New moon to new moon is a different kind of month, and I'll speak about that next. But one of the first ways we can experience an idea of a month is how long it takes the moon to circle the earth, or circle the zodiac. So sidereal means of the stars, moon aligning with a star, and how long it takes to get back to that star, or to the degree of a zodiac and getting back there. So we observe this cycle in the sky by tracking moon's consecutive alignments with a fixed star. And we observe this cycle in the chart by tracking moon's consecutive alignments to any particular zodiac degree, right? Sidereal month. Now, there are more than 12 of these months per year. There's about 13 and a third, 13.369. If you, like me, are fans of number magic, that number might get you buzzing. Here's the math for that. The moon moves about 13.3 zodiac degrees per day. So it's a really fun thing where 13 is kind of a moon number, right? 13.3 is actually 13 and a third, right? So 13, 1313 right there. And there's about 13 and 1/3 sidereal months in a year. So like if we start a year with the moon at 0 Capricorn, it's going to get back to that time place 13 times and then go a little further before the year completes. So you'll often hear people say, well, there's actually not 12 months a year, there's 13 months a year. And we had that all figured out before patriarchy. Yeah, a lot of these folks haven't actually tuned in to the dynamic beauty and complication of the rhythms of the moon earth and the earth moon sun. It's a trickier problem than that. And even if we're looking at moon circling the earth to describe a month, and that's the sidereal month, there's not 13, there's about 13 and a third, okay? Anyway, so this is why the size of a nakshatra is 13 and a third degrees, because that's about how much ecliptic travel for each day of the moon. And that's on average. We're going to see why that's very importantly an average. Okay, so another type of month, the synodic month. A synod means meeting, right? So in this case, when we're talking about the synods of moon and sun, from Earth's point of view, which is the center of the chart, consecutive alignments of Earth, Moon, Sun, right? New moon to new moon. So here we see we're starting at the same chart that we did in the sidereal slide before, but now it's not 27.3 days, but actually about 29 and a half between consecutive new moons. You could time a synodic month between consecutive full moons or consecutive first quarter moons or whatever, basically moon returning to its same phase. And typically we look at this as new moon to new moon, which is about 29 and a half days, 29.53059 days. So in the many of the old solely lunar calendars that are doing months based upon like new moon to new moon, but trying to work the year with that too. Anyway, for the months, you alternate between months of 30 days and months of 29 days, because that helps you keep the 29.5 day pace. Well, it's not 29.5, it's 29.53059 on average, and things get much more complicated. There's this just beautiful rhythm of Earth, Moon, Sun, and Earth, Sun, which of course is the year, right? Earth about the sun. So anyway, for the synodic month, we observe this cycle, of course, by watching the moon wax away from and then wane back towards the sun, right? New moon to full moon to new moon. We observe this cycle in the chart by tracking moon's consecutive conjunctions with sun, new moon to new moon. And there are 12 and a third. And check that out, 12.369. Remember sidereal, 13.369. Fascinating. So there's actually 12 and a third synodic months per year, right? So when people say, no, there's not 12, there's 13, really depends on what kind of month you're talking about. And typically, this is the kind of month we're talking about, right? New moon to new moon. So it's like 12 and a third. The lunar year of 12 synodic cycles of 12 lunations is about 354 days. It's about 11 days shy of a solar year, Earth about the sun, a tropical year. So the way that a lot of the old solely lunar calendars work is you do like a 12-month year, but after every 3 years, you have this extra 33 days. So you just throw a month in. But 29 and a half does not equal 33. You can't have a month of 29 and a half either. It's 29 or 30. It's a complicated issue. Here's some of the math of how we get to the 12.369. The most amazing thing is that these cycles actually do synchronize with the cycles of Earth, Sun, the tropical year, seasons. And you better pay attention to that if you like things like, I don't know, food and survival, because while it's good to plant by the moon, of course, it's the seasonal energies, which is Earth and Sun, that are going to tell you when you can plant and harvest and all of that first and foremost, right? 19 Earth orbits of the sun, 19 tropical years, is almost exactly equal to 235 lunations. It's amazing that these cycles of 365.242199 days per year and 29.53059 days per synodic month, it's amazing that they synchronize. I mean, it's almost exact that 235 lunations is about 2 hours off from 19 years. And these are averages. It's important to know that things change. Circles are not the way of orbits, they're ellipses. And that brings all sorts of interesting intricacies to these equations, right? But importantly, check out the metonic cycle. When you turn 19, you will, on your solar return, also have a lunar return sometime on that day. Sometimes it's like calendar day before or after, but sometimes within like a day's worth of hours of your 19th, 38th, 57th, 76th, 95th. These are all 19s, right? These will be times where during a solar return, you are also experiencing a lunar return. In other words, the moon returns to the same phase while the sun's in the same degree of the zodiac. The moon is reflecting sunlight to Earth in the same way that it did when you were born. Although there'll be also some important differences. So one way we can get after eclipses is to also look at metonic cycles, because when we have an eclipse, as we are about to on December 14th, 2020, it's likely that 19 years before and 19 years after, there will also be an eclipse. Well, likely might not be the the right word for this. So let me pop out of here and we'll just kind of see an example. So here is this coming solar cerro series, and I'm going to get back into what the cerro series is. Eclipse 142, 23 out of 72. All right. So if I'm sitting with a client and, you say, well, what's this eclipse mean for me? Well, first of all, I want to know the chart in and of itself. So I'm just realizing I want to kind of diverge and kind of ask that question. Then we'll look at these metonic cycles, and then we'll get into the Saros cycle, and then we'll be complete for our journey today. Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my own chart as an example. So I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, October 24th, 1975, 7:39 p.m. Now you know everything about me, right? Please don't tell. And you're like, what? Gemini Brett's a Scorpio. Well, I was born at night with a Gemini moon and Gemini on the rise. And that means Sagittarius setting. And that means that this coming December 14th, 2020 total solar eclipse is in my 7th house, right? So one of the ways where we're going to sit with how does this global event, right? A total solar eclipse, right? How does that play for an individual? One of the ways that we're going to get after that is, okay, well, where in the astrological houses does it live? I also did a transmission some time ago for EA Zoom meetings, which was the wishes and the wounds of the heavenly houses. I've kind of updated my approach a bit since then, but it was an interesting video. So check that out if you want to know a little bit more about my own approach. Well, the 7th house, we say, is relationship, right? So there's something in this eclipse, though Sagittarius itself does not necessarily imply relating relationship. Not that all signs don't have relating and relationship. Everything is relationship, right? But Sagittarius by itself, typically we're thinking what? 9th house-ish themes. I mean, because the tropical signs, they are the Earth's houses. This point in space, 0 degrees tropical Aries, is due east from the center of the Earth where we are all one. The very powerful, true, and elegant astronomy of the tropical zodiac is simply this. The directions are defined by Gaia's spine, by Earth's rotational axis, and every moment forever, the northern pole is leaning towards 0 degrees tropical Cancer, and the southern pole towards 0 degrees tropical Capricorn. So as Earth orbits the sun, and the sun is here, that's the sun's tropical Cancer ingress when it shines directly above the Tropic of Cancer, right? When it's at Earth north, and therefore the northern hemisphere is experiencing maximum light, right? We're here now, it's more like we're at this time, right? Southern lean towards the sun at December solstice. So sun shining above the Tropic of Capricorn, and summer solstice for the southern hemisphere, winter solstice for the northern hemisphere. As the Earth orbiting the sun, north is always leaning towards 0 Cancer. This is the sun from Earth's point of view at 0 Libra, which is west of the Earth, 0 Capricorn. Here's 0 Aries. 0 Aries is not like east from Australia and California at the same time. That's impossible. But because the directions of Earth are defined for the entire Earth, and from the center of the Earth, which is where we measure planetary placement in the signs from, there is a point that's due east of that center of Earth, and that point is 0 degrees tropical Aries. And that's why we can say that this is like the global ascendant, you see? And why we can say that, okay, well, this is what we call the natural zodiac as modern astrologers. Although some classical astrologers, and I study a ton of classical astrology, have an issue with that. It's a very astronomical truth. All right, so the Sagittarius is often expressed similarly to the ways of the 9th house. So before we look at this against a native's chart, let's just look at the chart itself, right? Because really any transit, right? Any moment in transit to a nativity, right? Like this, oops, out of control. I guess Neptune wants to remind me the eclipse is squaring Neptune. When I look at this as a transit chart to a nativity, I mean, in a sense, anytime we look at a transit, what is it? It's synastry. It's a relationship between two moments, right? So in this case, the moment where I was born, and this moment of the coming December 14th, 2020 solar eclipse. And typically when I'm consulting, a client about these, I'm certainly going to also show where the angles are, right? And I would do that not only for the location where the native is in the moment, and this will be true for me, I'll be in Richmond, California at the time, but I would also cast these for the natal location too. I'm going to leave that out of the mix because we only have so much time. So a lot of this, I'm going to say, okay, it's 7th house. But even before I go there, I want to say just what is the eclipse itself about? Like for the whole world. And then how is that in relationship with a particular person? Which of course will be different than it is for another person, right? Because, just like this other sister science called musical harmony, that was noise. It can be measured. It's a quantity. But the way that dances you, or maybe doesn't dance you, or asks you to run away or whatever, like that's quality, right? And harmony is the bridge that helps us understand quantity and quality, just as astrology is the bridge that helps us understand the quantity, the astronomy, and the quality. How will this eclipse dance you versus how will it dance me? Right, will have a lot to do with where does it show up in your nativity, right? In which houses is it for you? For me, 7th house. How does it align to your natal planets? Oh, there's a trine to my Jupiter where Mars is. Lilith is at the south node, right? We could go on and on and on. I think I'm going to leave that there for now. Oh, Neptune's opposite Venus, right? So it's not just where the sun and the moon, which of course are the eclipse, are aligning to the nativity, but what about the other planets during the eclipse? How do they align? How is this eclipse a moment in time that's also speaking of kind of a greater period of time where Neptune is transiting Venus? Or Mars, who we know has been retrograde in Aries, is speaking to the Jupiter again. All right, so before we go there, even further, let's do this. And know that eclipses come in pairs, at least. Sometimes you can have solar, lunar, solar, or sometimes lunar, solar, lunar. I mean, like within a month's time, a solar eclipse for a new moon, followed by a lunar eclipse, a very total lunar eclipse, followed by another solar eclipse the next new moon. Or a very partial or penumbral lunar eclipse, followed by a very total or annular solar eclipse, with the following full moon also being an eclipse. In this particular eclipse season, this total solar eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius follows a lunar eclipse, which was a penumbral lunar eclipse in the sign of Gemini. Okay, so let me show you a thing about what a penumbral lunar eclipse is. And I'm going to go to my favorite eclipse sandbox online, which is moonblink.info, to have some pictures that will help us out here and also help us study the cerro series. So here is the November 30th, 2020 penumbral lunar eclipse. And Moonblink offers this graphic to show us where on Earth it was visible. I mean, interestingly, it should be, we're looking at a full moon, so I feel like it should be where the shadow is, nighttime. But the way the graphic works is anywhere in the light, it's nighttime, and therefore the full moon is visible for the lunar eclipse. Well, a penumbral lunar eclipse is I mean, it's even less than a partial lunar eclipse. It's not the moon moving through the shadow of Earth's rocky body, but rather through the shadow of Earth's gaseous atmosphere, which really does not cast much of an atmosphere. I was up watching this thing and it looked like a full moon to me. I've never personally been able to notice any difference between a penumbral eclipse and the full moon. It's like I've watched it move through and come out, and it's like, did anything happen? Well, just because we don't see some amazing occultation or eclipse shadow phenomenon, doesn't mean it's not a powerful thing. And importantly, the more partial a lunar eclipse, the more potentially total the solar eclipse that accompanies it. So how do we know that when we look at either of these charts that an eclipse is happening? Let's start with that lunar eclipse. And the answer is the proximity of, in this case, a full moon, moon opposite sun from Earth's point of view, the proximity of the full moon to the lunar nodes. And later I'll show you a slide which will show you the orbs of how far a full moon is from the nodes to determine whether it's an eclipse at all, or a partial, or a total, or penumbral. Some of that also can be seen in Lilith. I'm going to show you what Lilith is astronomically too. So Lilith will help us understand something about eclipses. Now, this is a full moon, right? So we do have a Gemini lunar eclipse, which of course is a full moon, not too close to the nodes, 11 degrees away. Well, there's 14 to 15 days between full moon and new moon. The sun moves about a degree per day. And so that means we add 14 or 15 here, we're going to get to, or 14 and a half, we're going to get to 23. Well, that's very close to the node. And so we see that in this solar eclipse, that it's so close to the node that it might be a total solar eclipse. And Lilith tells me it is. And I'll show you how to see that, okay? So we're in this case where, I mean, let's look at the lunar eclipse that follows that. Or let's do this. Let's go first from this Gemini lunar eclipse. Well, that's the full moon, which we typically treat as like the flower or the fruit of a cycle that would have been seeded with the previous new moon, right? So though the Gemini full moon lunar eclipse and the Sagittarius solar eclipse, which of course is a new moon, are related because they're the two eclipses of this particular eclipse season, we might also want to look back and say, okay, well, here's the Scorpio new moon, which is definitely too far from the node to be an eclipse. This is just a new moon, which really is a no moon because you can't see the moon when she goes under the beams of the sun unless you're in a place where the moon is occulting the solar disk, right? But this was like a Scorpio new moon cycle, which had a Gemini lunar eclipse. Let me reverse these to honor chronology, right? So Scorpio new moon in Gemini full moon, and the full moon itself close enough to the nodes to be a very partial, in this case, penumbral lunar eclipse. And that, of course, as we saw, is followed then by this solar eclipse, which is the new moon of a cycle, which will have a full moon in the sign of Cancer here. 20 or 19 degrees from the nodes, definitely too far for this to be a lunar eclipse. Okay, so there was a Scorpio new moon with a Gemini lunar eclipse, very partial or penumbral lunar eclipse, and then a total Sagittarius total eclipse, solar eclipse, new moon, followed by a Cancer lunar eclipse. So when I'm sitting with clients, I'm going to think of this cycle as a Sagittarius Cancer cycle. Right. And I'm going to see where the new moons and the full moons playing out in their charts, especially clients who I have the honor of sitting with regularly, like myself. Right. I'm going to look at all these lunations throughout the year. Like, what is it touching into the natal chart? Right. And so similarly, I'm going to look at that Gemini penumbral eclipse as the full moon of a new moon that came before and see where that's in the native's chart. And I think of that as a Scorpio Gemini cycle. But I'm also going to consider the two eclipses of this particular eclipse season. The eclipse seasons come our way every year that the sun is either at the south node, and therefore the new moon's close enough to the nodes for eclipse, or at the north node, and therefore the new moon and full moon around that time close enough to the nodes for an eclipse. The sentence before that was a rather strange one. And then it's cool to see, okay, in these 14 and a half days between the full moon or lunar eclipse and the new moon or total solar eclipse, that now Venus has moved far enough to be conjoined the place where Mercury was, that Mercury's moved far enough to now be conjoined the place where the node was, and the node still is, since they move particularly slowly retrograde at eclipse time in eclipse seasons. Then Mercury's moved into square Neptune, right? There's things that are happening between these couple weeks. Mercury's now trine Mars and applying in partile, meaning same degree. But maybe first and foremost, I'm going to look at this eclipse season and say, okay, Gemini, Sagittarius. So what is that? Well, for me, just as hot and cold are two sides of one thing called temperature. Now, hot's not allowed to know it's cold because they're opposites, but they're actually the same thing. They're both temperature. There's just two sides of that thing called temperature. Gemini and Sagittarius are two sides of one thing. What is that one thing? Now, that's an endless question that every astrologer, I think, can ask and know more and more and more about the zodiac. What is the one thing that Taurus and Scorpio are the two sides of? What is the one thing that Aries and Libra are the two sides of? Well, Libra we often associate with relationship. I will argue it's one side of relationship, it's othership, and it must be balanced by selfness, which is a word I love to utilize for Aries. That if we don't balance othership with selfness, we'll never meet in the middle way of right relating. So we've got very strong Libra, we need to balance it with its polarity with Aries and vice versa. If we've got very strong Sagittarius, we need to balance it with some Gemini and vice versa. So all polarity points are inherently relational. But inherently relational in the truth of two-ness, where like you don't have up without down, you don't have in without out. You don't have Gemini without Sagittarius. They're two sides of one thing called what? And there's many answers to that question. I'll offer that one of them is truth, where Sagittarius is the one truth, the truth, the capital truth, higher truth. Well, what is that? Well, some will say it's only found if you pray in this one and only way. You must climb the mountain. You must seek according to this, which isn't seeking at all, right? I think very interestingly, given the truth that Neptune is squaring the lunar nodes at this time, we're really asked to look into our beliefs and belief systems and our potential delusions thereof, and a lot about faith and religiosity. I mean, I think the Sagittarius Pisces square is a very interesting being. It feels to me to be the tension inherent to seeking versus believing. Right, because many are taught that faith is like, hey, this is your faith, just believe it because we say it's true. Well, if you believe that, you're never going to seek. And if you're asked questions, you're usually excused from the church or whatever it may be, right? Sagittarius needs to ask questions. It's on this adventure. Well, hopefully it will, because if not, if it feels like it's already found the one and only truth, it can very quickly lead towards fundamentalism. As much as Sagittarius can be about other cultures and traveling and finding the ways that everyone does these things to see that we're all aligning to the truth, which you can feel that kind of Gemini in the way that I'm expressing that too. It can be this is the one and only way, and all you climbers are on the wrong path. Well, that's probably the only wrong path, is to tell the climbers they're doing it wrong, right? So the other side of the truth is the truth that there are many truths. There are as many truths as there are beings. There are two sides of any story experienced by two people. Which one's right? Both. And I think one of the great challenges that we see in this time, where the lunar nodes are swimming through the tropical signs of Gemini and Sagittarius, which is true for about a year and a half, starting in May of 2020, is this idea of what is truth. And with the South Node in Sagittarius, maybe we're rooted in this idea of what is the one and only truth. And with the North Node in Gemini, maybe we're invited to explore more the truth that there are many truths. So an interesting thing, and one of the reasons why I wanted to show my chart at this time is so much of our connections to any celestial happening are very often going to be found within the way that it accesses the natal chart, right? It's very hard to remove ourselves from the picture of our delineations and our transmissions. And I prefer to be honest about that. I mean, we can try to be very cold and calculated and just use the science of astrology, but so much of our own personal energy comes into it. So I think it's really cool to look at a global happening like an eclipse or a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction or whatever it may be, see how it relates to the nativity, be like, yeah, I'm probably going to come at it like this, right? How am I going to come after this thing? Well, let me turn this around for chronology. The middle is my birth, right? Sorry, the very center chart is my natal chart. The middle chart here is the Gemini penumbral lunar eclipse, which you can see was at my ascendant. Right? It's in the 12th house side. So there could be some hidden things and some self-sabotage and all of that, right? It's interestingly in Gemini, we say the dispositor is Mercury. It's trining the natal Mercury. Whereas the Sagittarius solar eclipse that follows 7th house, in Sagittarius, we say the dispositor is Jupiter. It's trining the natal Jupiter. So we see some interesting links here, not only like are the so-called dispositors of these signs, Gemini and Sagittarius, connected into these particular eclipses for this native who's me, but also it's very personal, right? Because the lunar eclipse is on the horizon, which is the relationship axis. And not only is the solar eclipse in the 7th house, and I was pointing out some of these trines and whatnot before, it's opposite the moon, right? So what are eclipses? Sun, moon, and earth. So when they align to the sun and the moon and to the earth, where is the earth? It is the center of the chart. It is expressed through the angles and perhaps mostly through the ascendant. And so this is a really strong eclipse cycle in my own experience. And it seems to be about relationships. Another way I like to play this, I'm not going to get into today. Maybe you can leave in the comments whether you're watching live or later if you'd be interested in hearing the way that I approach annual profections. But I'll just say at 45 years of age, in my 46th year, when you turn the wheel 46 times, you find that the ascendant has profected to the 10th sign, which for me is Pisces. And importantly, Sagittarius is the 10th of Pisces. The 7th house is the 10th of the 10th. So there's a hidden message about kind of career happenings here. and honor and legacy and how we show up and how we're seen in that. Yeah. Can also say traditionally in a Pisces year, the Time Lord would be Jupiter. So it's interesting to see that Jupiter between the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse is meeting his landlord, right? Jupiter in Aries, and Mars comes by, check in on that cat. And then also Jupiter is said to rule both, traditionally said to rule Pisces and Sagittarius. And so to have a Sagittarius eclipse in the 7th, which is the 10th of the 10th, we look to Jupiter who's in the 11th. So there's something about communities and friends. Now, so I could get into like the natal delineation. This isn't meant to just become a reading for myself, but obviously we're talking about relationship themes. And I think that there is some of that inherent anyway in the Gemini Sagittarius axis, maybe more so in Gemini, right? Because as the third sign, what's going on there, right? So the 12th, we're still in the womb when those stars rose. They rose before your birth, before your descent, if you will. That happens at the ascendant, right? And now you're you in the first house and you've got a path and a mission. The second house, I feel, is when the cord is cut and now the baby has needs. We can't survive on our own. So, what are the needs of your soul? I find that often reflected in the second house, where, yeah, money, resources, and that, but also values. Do you value yourself? Like, that's very inherent to your own survival. And the baby has needs for milk to be changed and can't do these things on its own. So it has to cry for mom. That's for me, like developing the need to communicate to who. The third, traditionally, we know siblings in these things, I'll say they compete for your food and they teach you how to speak. But in the tradition, the third is the rejoicing of the moon in the house of the goddess. That's who I have to learn how to speak to, is mommy, right? And the point here is it's not really about, hey, mom, what are your needs? Oh, sorry, it's 3 a.m. I understand you'd like to sleep. I'll cry in the morning when you're well rested. No, I need milk. Right? But mom might come in and say, oh my gosh, the baby needs to change the diaper. No, because I'm screaming milk, but it sounds just like diaper, right? So one of the things about the third, and this is the truth that there are many truths in many languages, right? And there's even kind of a psychic thing that starts forming here, but most importantly, it is the acknowledgement that, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I have needs, so I need another. That's kind of a second house reality that's born. But also, I need to learn to communicate my needs in that person's language. That's a tricky thing, right? I mean, I think one of the principal teachings of relationships, and I'm meant to be there right now, right, is like the golden rule is not golden, right? The golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. No. Do unto others as they would have them done unto them. When I give my partner everything I need to be happy, that does not make her happy. And I'm an idiot to believe it should. And by the way, I've been that idiot many times, right? No, what does she need? Don't give her what I need. I need to give her what she needs. And I need to help her understand what I need, which is very different than what she needs, if she wants to be able to help me feel okay and comfortable in all these things. Yeah. Now, the tricky thing is once we even come into that realization, which I hope you can see is kind of a very third house neighbors, siblings, like atmosphere. It's that realization. They have their truth, I have my truth. They have their needs, I have my needs. In a sense, we're speaking of the language of the seventh house, right? And I said before, this is one of the reasons why I want to look at a global event against my own nativity, because while this is Gemini, Sagittarius, these eclipses, for me, it's like ascendant, descendant, first house, seventh house. So how am I not going to be tripping on relationships at this time and maybe overdoing it in the expression of this is what Gemini can mean? I do think that Gemini is the formation of relating a relationship. There's me and the other, but it's less like the seventh or like Libra is where, oh, what are your needs? And here are my needs. It's more like these are my needs, but why can't you hear me? Because the truth is I have to learn to communicate my needs in the mother's tongue. I need to teach her that this means cry and this means diaper. Or maybe she can teach me, and she might even teach me some of those baby hand signals and that kind of thing. You see what I mean? And so in partnerships, it's really beautiful how we can see the offerings, and there's a trine, of course, between the seventh and the third, to realign the way that we communicate to find, in a sense, like the Rosetta Stone between one language and another. Okay. Well, how does Sagittarius have to do with anything in that regard? Well, for me personally, it's in my seventh house. So again, I'm meant to be tripping there, as this eclipse, I think, would indicate. And that will be true, I would say, for anybody who has Gemini on the rise. But also there is something in the ninth that, while it can just be your higher education, I mean, it can be, your like high school diploma that leads you to this, certificate that leads you to your job as a mechanic or whatever, right? 10th vocation. And then your 11th is going to be other like car people and that, and then the 12th. But the ninth can be our higher study, our higher journey. Traditionally, it's the joy of the sun, the house of God, And so what is our relationship to that? How do I speak my needs to whatever that being is? It higher self? I mean, it depends so much on your own cosmology and what is the truth. Okay. So I hope you feel me, and a lot of this, I guess, I am expressing is what you might expect in my own nativity. And when we look at these eclipses, and so of course this is meant to dance you in a different way than it's dancing me, right? So let's take me out of this situation. Let's actually just focus now on the solar eclipse. Well, sorry, I'm going to bring me back into the mix. I guess I'll just do it in the solar eclipse for the sake of time here. As we were looking at before, there's a 19-year cycle, a metonic cycle. So when I'm speaking with somebody about, this is in your seventh house, this is trine to Jupiter, who's the ruler of the seventh house, there really seem to be relationship things going on. That seems to also be indicated by Neptune opposite Venus. Like, what's going on there? What's going on with your friends? What's going on career? That's kind of coming more from like the perfections idea for me, as I expressed before. It's opposite your moon. You feeling okay, dude? What do you feel about what you're learning and teaching? We can go on and on and on, right? So I'm going to sit with somebody and kind of get into these things, and hopefully open up through our conversation an opportunity for them to share what's going on with them. But I can also look at cycles, right? Which is one of the great gifts of our cosmic craft. So, all right, well, what's happened for you 19 years ago, right? So why would I say it that way? Because we go 19 years into the past. This is not the smartest way to get here on the software, but whatever. And we're going to find that there was a lunar eclipse at a very similar degree. Okay, this is now November 30th, same calendar date, but 2001. Different image than that other penumbral lunar eclipse we saw. Saturn's in the house, right? And this one actually isn't even an eclipse at all. It's just a full moon, but it precedes this solar eclipse. Now you can see that the solar eclipse has a different relationship to the node in 2020. Actually, let's turn these around for the sake of chronology. It's a thing I like to do. So birth chart on the inside, December 14th, 2001, eclipse in the middle, and then December 14th, 2020, eclipse on the outside. Now, 19 years after, 2039, we might expect to see an eclipse at that same degree. But, I'm going to ask somebody about the past, not the future. What was going on for you in 2001? And, we can take the nativity out of this thing altogether, right? And say, well, what was going on for all of us? Because when we look at this solar Saros 142, well, it's eclipsing a point that was also eclipsed in 2001 by, let's see, solar Saros series 13245 of 71. Well, what was going on then? What was going on in the world in 2001? And how does it relate to the truth? That might depend on how it speaks to you, but certainly that was the most powerful year that we're still living. And you can say 2020 is even stronger with this whole, we're all in it together feeling, but that kind of went down in 2001 too. not just for the United States with the September Tower experience, the Tower. I mean, think about the way that these two times relate. One simple thing I can share is that like there were laws passed not only where I live, but in many nations around the world where citizens basically signed over their, right to privacy to be protected by being observed. And now in this year 2020, we're taking that to the next level. In some places, there's literally mandatory phone apps to contact trace you and whatnot. We can go back 19 years before 2001 and we find our way to 1982. It's kind of the advent of personal computing, interestingly. And I saw a great interview with Steve Jobs then where they were like, well, because he's like, everybody's going to have a computer in their own home. They're like, no way. But okay, when that happens, aren't you afraid of the invasion of privacy? Like, no way. 2001, Patriot Act where I live, 2020. So there's one interesting thread between these metonic cycles. Now, metonic eclipses happen only in strings of either 4 or 5, separated by exactly 19 years, right? So 4 times 19 years is 76. 5 times 19 years is 95. It's either a 76-year period with 4 eclipses separated by 19 years at the same degree, or 5 eclipses separated by 19 years at the same degree, which is 95 years, right? So they're really powerful. But importantly, like, let me show you a couple images here. First of all, the eclipse in 2001 and 2020, they're on different sides of the nodes. So that would help us see, I guess, that, all right, well, what about 19 years from now, and that's 2038, is there going to be an eclipse at the same degree? And the answer, there's the, whoa. Did I not go far enough? Oh, 2039. There's a Gemini lunar eclipse, and this time it looks like a total lunar eclipse to me. And then followed by a Sagittarius eclipse, which is a partial, well, maybe total solar eclipse. But you can see now it's much further from the nodes, which is how I couldn't quite tell, right? Nodes at 13, eclipse same degree, but further from the nodes. So eclipses of metonic strings, they apply to and then separate from the nodes, and therefore they don't last long because we know new moons need to meet near nodes for eclipses. I want to also just show you that in these 3 Sagittarius solar eclipses on December 14th of 3 years separated by 19, 2001, 2020, 2039, notice that the eclipses have a different aspect to true black moon Lilith. All right, in 2001, there's a square with Lilith. In 2020, there's a quincunx with Lilith, so closer to the opposition. In 2020, there's a perfect opposition to Lilith. In other words, that's a supermoon. Okay, how do I know? Well, let me take you back into these slides, and we're going to speak about a very different eclipse cycle known as the Saros cycle, which it coordinates 3 of these types of months. It's amazing. Okay, astrologers, if I asked you what is the smallest number that 2 and 3 and 4 can all divide into, the answer I hope we all know is 12, right? The Zodiac, 12ness, the seed of life. This is the first opportunity for a number to celebrate duality or polarity, twos, triplicity and quadruplicity. Yeah. 10 only has duality. So we want 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13, 14, new moon, full moon. We could go on and on. There's so many answers and mysteries here in the body. So if I asked you, what is the number that 29.53 days, 27.21 days, and 27.55 days, what's the smallest number that they all divide equally into? You're like, what? And the answer is 18.03 years, or a Saros cycle. Okay, so let me strip this down. First and foremost, the synodic month, something we already looked into, right? If we're talking about eclipses of the same family, and this is Saros series talk here, of course, it's got to be a solar eclipse, and a solar eclipse which means a new moon and a new moon, or a lunar eclipse and a lunar eclipse, which means a full moon and a full moon. In other words, it's got to be linked up by the synodic cycle, right? New moon to new moon. So we saw what that is, consecutive conjunctions of moon and sun from Earth's point of view, right? It's also got to obey this periodicity of what's known as the animalistic month, or be close to it. So what is that? And notice I show the glyph for Lilith. What is Lilith astronomically? Very exaggerated image here. Thanks to my love, Scorpiana, for co-creating this illustration with me. Orbits are not circles, they are ellipses. While circles have one center, ellipses have two foci. Because the Earth is much more massive than the moon, but way less massive than most planets are relative to their moons. It's a freaky thing, this moon, which is 3/11ths the size of Earth by diameter, but the Earth is much more massive. So one of the foci of the moon-Earth orbital relationship lives within the bounds of the Earth. It's not right at the center, and it produces this kind of cool wobbling effect as together moon and Earth dance about the sun, right? But if we use this model that we learned in school of Earth about sun and moon about Earth, the moon does not orbit the Earth in a circle, it gets closer to and further away in this elliptical orbit, right? And the point that's furthest away, it's called the lunar apogee. Now, if you cast true black moon Lilith on a chart, which is the name somehow that has become aligned to the dark foci of the Earth moon relationship, there's no point there. It's like a gravitational well of moon Earth love, you know? And but if you look through that dark point from Earth, you're facing the lunar apogee far from Earth, where the moon is furthest from Earth and therefore apparently smallest, dimmest, and slowest. On the opposite side of Lilith in the zodiac is the lunar perigee, close to Earth, where the moon is closest and therefore largest, brightest. We call that super moon these days, and fastest, okay? So a big moon, from our point of view, it's not like the moon's changing size, just relative. When it's closer, it appears bigger. When it's further, it appears smaller. A big moon is more likely to occult the entire sun disk. A small moon is more likely to be occulted for longer by the Earth's shadow during full moon. So do you see how Lilith participates with eclipse magic? All right, the third cycle in these many moons that needs to coordinate for Saros series is the draconic month. While the animalistic is 27.55 days, the draconic 27.21. So it's going to be a big number before these things converge. Can you see how that works? And they have to synchronize with 29.53059. What's the draconic month? It's moon from one node back to the node. Here's an image of the same new moon we were looking at before, but it's a no moon. Why? Because from Earth's point of view, there's no eclipse for you because the moon was north of the sun. So no shadow play, the moon just lost under the beams. New moon is no moon, and that's why many of the ancient solely lunar calendars did not begin with the calculated moon-sun conjunction, but rather once the moon passes the sun far enough by a day later that you can see her sliver waxing crescent Diana's bow in the sunset west with your eyes. So we can never see new moons unless they meet at the nodes. And in this case, that was not true. I can see that because the moon is further along than the north lunar node, here she has northern latitude. She's going to be north of the sun, above the sun from the northern hemisphere's point of view, from the southern hemisphere's point of view, below. I also did a EA Zoom meetings about lunar latitude some time ago. So this thing's all about the dragons, the serpents. Why do we see these nodes in the way that she slivers and in the marking of the cobra's head? Because every month the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun, snaking from above to below at K2 and from below to above, or let's say north and south, K2 and Rahu, south node, north node. This is the ecliptic. It's the plane of Earth's orbit about the sun. And for the most part, our solar system is relatively flat, but not exactly. So like here's Mercury's orbital path. And you can see that there's going to place where the path of Mercury crosses the path of Earth. These are different planes. That's a Mercury node. Here's Venus's path. That's Venus's south node right there. And now we're going to watch the moon traveling there, crossing the ecliptic. Here, crossing the ecliptic, moving north. Now above the ecliptic or north of the ecliptic, coming back down, south of the ecliptic, coming back up, right? Every month, the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun. So when we look at this geocentrically, Earth-centered, here's that same ecliptic. We experience Earth's annual orbit of the sun here on Earth by seeing the sun orbit us, moving across around the ecliptic curve, which is, if we project that out to space, it's the constellations of the Zodiac. So from Earth's point of view, the sun is always held by one of those 12 star groups. But the moon's on a slightly different path. Her path, the path of soul, diverges from the ecliptic, the path of spirit, by about 5 degrees. So when we have a new moon like this, moon and the sun in the same degree of the zodiac, that doesn't mean it's going to be an occultation. For that to happen, the moon's either going to have to meet the sun at these crossing points, the north node where the moon crosses from south latitude to north latitude, or the south, or sorry, yeah, the south node where we cross from north latitude to south latitude, right? So anytime the sun is at one of these nodes, we know the new moons and the full moons are close enough to the crossing points for there to be shadow play. And here are the orbs to know. This is a good time to take a screenshot if you're watching this live or later. It's sometimes hard to come across these. There's some difference of opinion for the exact limits. And I don't think I have out to penumbral lunar eclipse here, but they're pretty good. All right, so why the asterisks for total solar eclipse? And the reason is this. Even when the moon and the sun meet within 9 degrees and 55 arc minutes of either north or south node, it's not guaranteed to be a total solar eclipse. It could be a ring of fire or annular solar eclipse. Why? Because when the moon is further from Earth, she's apparently too small in our sky to occult the entire solar disk. So you can get that perfect alignment, but still get the ring of fire. You see what I mean? And how would we know? Well, you look to Lilith. All right, but before we go there, these are the 3 months that must synchronize for eclipses to have the same shape in their shadow play on Earth, and not the sidereal, right? So just these 3. Synodic, new moon to new moon, that periodicity. Animalistic, new moon or moon perigee back to moon perigee, or moon apogee to moon apogee. You can see that in the chart, moon Lilith to moon Lilith, true black moon Lilith. And the draconic, moon north node back to moon north node, or moon south node back to moon south node. These 3 different months align in such a way that we come to 18.03 years, or 223 lunations, right? I mean, I should show you how many animalistic months and how many draconic months that are. You can do the research. Actually, Wikipedia has a really cool page for that. But I love that the moon card of the tarot is the 18. And we have this eclipse series that's 18 years long, about 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. It's a Saros. And then the sun card is the 19. And that 19 years are 235 lunations. Interesting, that tilt of Earth, 23.5 in our day and age. That 19 years, the metonic cycle. So these are sun, moon, earth things. And what happens between 18.6 years, or more accurately, 18.618 years? The transit of the zodiac by the lunar nodes, which of course are, from Earth's point of view, the crossings of the sun and the moon, right? So 18, 18 and a half, 19, and it opens up this image. I spoke about this some in my first talk with the Zoom, Joy and Saros. It's something that I find so powerfully to connect to personally and with our clients. There are these windows between eclipse family return, which will happen around the 18th or before the 18th birthdays, and the metonic, same phase to which you were born, all the 19s. The first time it's 1 year long, the second time 2, the third time 3, and like that. It's a very powerful thing. So, and tune into that talk if you want to hear more about that. But let's play a game, and I'm going later than I meant, which doesn't surprise anyone probably at this point. But let's show this. When I'm looking at, I'm going to bring in my own nativity again, and just say I'm sitting with, this cat, and he's freaking out about what does this eclipse mean for me, or whatever it may be. Hold on a sec. So here's the eclipse that's coming our way, December 14, 2020, which, as I showed before, is personally opposite my moon and in my 7th house. And yeah, there was one on that same degree 19 years before, 19 years after. That's the metonic thing. But the Saros series is another trip. So these are really fun to explore at moonblink.info/eclipse/search. Will let you type in any year, like the year of your birth. And here we find this 2020 total solar eclipse, which shadows just a small part of a place where you can have your feet on the earth in southern Chile and Argentina. But we also see that it belongs to the Saros series 142. Now, there's another convention, like some astrologers know this particular eclipse family as 4 South, which is great. And there's a challenge there, and I think it's a tale for another time. But what I want to show you is this, like here is the 2020 eclipse, now 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours before there was an eclipse actually on December 4th, right? So it's an anniversary of this one because I'm recording on December 4th, 2020. This is December 4th, 2002. Well, that doesn't look like 11 days at all. That's 10. Well, that just has to do with the strange way that the Gregorian system plays with leap days. So 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. How far does the sun move in one day? About 1 degree. So what is 11 days? About 11 degrees of the zodiac. In other words, where was this same eclipse family 18 years before in 2002? Well, let's go ask. And let me just jump to 2002. Oh, actually, you know what? I have this chart saved. So this would be Saros series 142, number 22 out of 72. For the sake of chronology, I'm going to flip it around. So my birth chart in the middle. Here we see the 2002 December 4th in this time zone, December 3rd, just barely, 2002. 11 degrees shy of 23. Sag is 12 Sag, right? So you can always basically subtract 11. And so there you go, my own personal nativity, it's very close to my descendant, right? Very close to my Neptune. Yeah. So when I'm looking and I'm sitting with a client, I'm saying, all right, yeah, there's this eclipse coming. It's opposite your moon. It's in your 7th house, all these things. Neptune's on the square and it's opposite your Venus. In other words, it's loose, but this eclipse squares your Venus and the Mercury is trining your Jupiter and all the things, right? I'm also thinking to myself, oh, I wonder what happened 19 years ago when there was an eclipse at that same degree. And what happened 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours ago when there was an eclipse of the same family? So I just want to point this out to you. Let me do it this way. I'm taking my nativity out. Here was the eclipse of December 3rd, 2002. Let's add one more eclipse of this family to make this point more visible. So Solar Saros series 21 of 72. All right, let's see how it's working now. Okay, interestingly, what happens 11 degrees before 12 Sag? 1 Sag. In other words, this eclipse family, which I think is very much about truth, it ingressed Sagittarius in 1984. And if you, like me, think that it's very Orwellian right now, that might intrigue you. Okay, what I want to show here is just astronomically something where you can see the proximity to the node, right? Here in this 1984 chart, 4 degrees from the nodes, even though that one featured Scorpio node. And that's important to remember that because eclipses do meet where the nodes are, but there's some level of orb, so they don't have to be in the same sign that hosts the nodes at the time, right? That was the case in 84. This eclipse family, 18 years before, would have been 11 degrees shy of that. In other words, 20 Scorpio, where Saturn was at this time, interestingly. But in 1984, this eclipse family first snaked its way around the zodiac into Sagittarius. And so we want to look at that. Where's that in a native's chart, for example, right? But I want to show you it's 4 degrees from the node. Sorry, I can't add 3.5. And it's relatively quincunx Lilith. See that? Right? The quincunx would be the first degree of Taurus. So it's, 145 degrees, this phase angle. All right, well, let's look at the next one of the series, December 3rd, 2002, at least in California time zone. How far from the node? 3 degrees, 3.5 degrees. I mean, the same distance, right? So you see, it's not only a synodic cycle, new moon to new moon, some periodicity in the truth, it's 223 lunations. It's also some whole number of draconic months, which happens every time the moon has the same phase angle to a node. It's also, hopefully you can see, the same, a whole number about of animalistic months. See the quincunx for that solar eclipse and Lilith? And the same thing will be true coming here in a theater called you very soon with this December 14th, 2020 Sagittarius solar eclipse, now another 11 degrees along, but 3 degrees from the node, and quincunx Lilith. So what happens is this arranges for these eclipses. Here's one in 1966. Interestingly, in the South America realm then, okay? Look, just trace that kind of shape of that curve. Here's one in 84, the next one to come around. Now it's a third of the way around the Earth because 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours is a third of an earthly spin. But same shape. You see that the shape is determined by proximity to the nodes and phase with Lilith. Here is the next one in 2002. Okay, when there was all this talk about weapons of mass destruction, right? Where I live, and this kind of hoodwinking into another war, a big one, invasion of Iraq in 2003, and this is the next eclipse of that same family, which ingressed Sagittarius in 1984. And you'll see in 2020 the same places on Earth as it was in 1966. Why? Because 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours is 24 one spin of the globe. Okay, so if I had the time, I might go look at every eclipse of this family. I'm very interested in when it first became total. It was 1786 when this eclipse became totally total, or there's some totality in 1768 because it's a hybrid eclipse where literally during the eclipse, from some places you see an annular solar eclipse, the ring of fire, and from some places you see a total solar eclipse, that's the blue. But what's a very common practice is to go to look at the first eclipse of the cycle. Now, south node eclipses, they are born at Earth's south pole, and they're so partial. I mean, even if anyone's there to see it, they're barely going to see anything at all. But throughout time, they snake up and around the globe, and they come towards more temperate zones where they're much more likely to be total. And they continue the snaking up and around the globe. And finally, they finish at the Earth's North Pole. And even before they do, another south node eclipse is born to take this one's place, and it will snake up and around the globe. And before it's done, a new one's born to its reincarnation to do the same thing. They take a long time. North node eclipses, by the way, start at Earth's North Pole and then snake down and around. And before they finish at the South Pole, another North node eclipse at the North Poles replaces it. And you'll see that in the years of like solar eclipse, followed by a very total lunar eclipse, followed by another very partial solar eclipse, all within a month's time. It will be the end of one solar Saros series and the beginning of a next that's come to take its place. And that's why some astrologers are like, actually, it's just a reincarnation of that previous being. So let's just give it the same number. Like, so this one by some astrologers, like the great Bernadette Brady, whose wonderful book, Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark, is where I and many of us were first turned on to the very idea of Saros cycles. She calls this 4 South. But the astronomers call it 142 and differentiate it from different eclipses of the same time. So let me just show you an example here in 1624. This was the first eclipse of Saros series 142, according to Moonblink. Well, we can go look at that year 1624, and we're going to find that that year it was solar, lunar, solar. It's the very ending, not the last, but the ending of a solar Saros series that had been around since 5th century AD and runs all the way to 1714 AD. And in that year, a new eclipse was born at the south pole of Earth to come and take that other one's place when it's on its way out. And so the astronomers use this convention that differentiates between the two. And so while that was 104, which started in the 5th century AD and ran to the early 18th century, this is 142, which began in 1624 and will run for 1,280 years, 72 heartbeats of this dragon's rhythm every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours from 1624. So a convention that's sometimes applied is to say, okay, yeah, let's look at this eclipse, this Sagittarius situation. Let's look at it for a native and all those things. But also when we want to know more about this eclipse, with all of these aspects of the moment, the conjunction with Mercury behind the sun, squaring Neptune, trining Mars, the very strong Mars-Pluto square that's part of this eclipse, Pluto and Lilith, interestingly, in a trine, what's Venus up to in these late degrees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We might also consider, well, let's have a chart of the first eclipse of the cycle. And so here's Saros series 142, number 1 of 72. I did cast this for Richmond, California, where it certainly was not visible, but just remove the angles and cast it on a 0 Aries or natural zodiac wheel to kind of speak of, in a way, houselessness. Truthfully, the tropical signs are the Earth's houses. And this one, this eclipse family was born in the first, in Aries. Late degrees of Aries, interestingly with Mercury right there at the global east point. We see some interesting happenings. Interestingly, then also a trine with Jupiter, or sorry, a trine with Jupiter. Now it's a trine with Mars. I'm getting mixed up with the way that this coming eclipse transit or aspects my own chart. But what are some of the principal things you see here? Because just like your birth chart will also kind of express how you are at 22 and 45 and 90 in, at your birthplace and in Timbuktu or whatever, you know, this is kind of energetically like the birth chart for this entire family of eclipses, which are related by what? Animalistic month, draconic month, and synodic month. And they last for 1,280 years, and we're in the midst of it. Still kind of early on, we're 23 out of 72, and this is the first one. So what does it say? What do you see? I mean, Mercury in Aries and Mars in Gemini, so an interesting mutual reception there. Obviously, we've got some strong Leo going on, right? The sun said to be exalted in the sign of Aries. You know, it really comes down to how do you read a chart? What's at the Sun Mercury midpoint? It's that point itself is the node. It's close to the trine for Saturn and Uranus, who are conjoined very tightly. Opposite that point is Neptune. And one of the aspects in this chart that most intrigues me is this Venus Chiron conjunction in Pisces in a very strong yod, so-called finger of God, with Libra Neptune, who's in conjunct, quincunx her teacher Venus, and Leo Jupiter, right? And traditionally, Venus in Pisces would be looking for Jupiter's teachings, right? Modern will say Neptune. So some would say, like in modern play, that this is a mutual reception, Venus in Pisces and Neptune in Libra, right? Well, traditionally, there's said to be no reception between signs and the quincunx. So it's mutual, but not reception. Of course, traditionally, I mean, Neptune hadn't even been discovered at this time. This is Venus in Pisces, Jupiter's realm. So Venus is looking for Jupiter. It can't happen. Neptune's looking for Venus. They're all in these blind spots. There's something very Piscean, something very 12th house, something very mystical. And I think that's referenced in this 2020 eclipse, which we can also reference in how does it relate to the original eclipse of the series? It's like a transit to that birth moment, if you will, right? A very special, significant one, kind of like, if you will, a solar return, but an eclipse return of its own birth. That's a weird way to say that. I don't know if that conveys or makes sense, but what are you going to do? Check out where Neptune is. It can join where Venus was in the first eclipse of the series. And we know Neptune is so strong at this time for eclipses because nodes square Neptune, which is still aligning to perfect. Mercury's in on that scene. And as I said before, how can I not bring what I'm personally experiencing to this whole thing? I should hold up my Make Orwell Fiction Again shirt. It feels to me like there's a lot of beautiful dream of the higher relating and relating to spirit and the agape and the compassion of all that is. There's also a need to individuate and know who I am, and against balance the dream of othership with the light of in the mind of selfness. There's a strong energy of Leo stepping into our own creative art, our own courageous royalty. There's a beginning, an expression of that understanding that you have your truth and I have my truth and all these things, right? There's another strong yod here, right? Which is the Venus, Chiron, Pluto, Neptune. So we get this interesting hexagon or trapezoid shape. Now, how does this align for you? I mean, I will say there's a thing that I see, which is like the royalty is in conjunct the dream. The dream is in conjunct love, you know? And it just feels to me, and perhaps this is just my projection of my experience of these powerful and strange, weird, disillusionary, delusionary times of what is real and what is true, and is truth found in this world that's certainly not found on the news? Is it found by turning that shit off and going here, speaking with other beings, but I'm not even allowed to talk to them? You know, what is love? What is reality? It's just so alive in this eclipse. And I'm glad to show it to you too, because if you're a fan of like the delineations of the eclipse families in Bernadette Brady's book, I think she actually did the wrong chart for this particular eclipse family that's called 4 South in that book. And one thing I love in what she writes now, she's like, look, here's some delineations based on how I do astrology. What do you see? So let me end with that. What do you see in the very first eclipse of this solar cerro series the astronomers call 142, the first of 72 beats of this dragon's heart? What do you see in the coming 23rd beat of that same dragon's drum here in Sagittarius? How are they aligned to one another? And how do both align for you in your own nativity? What truths do you find there? And what is true? All right, EA Zoom. Thanks so much again for honoring me with an opportunity to share. It's always such a treat. I know that was fast and a lot of information, but the gift of recordings is we can stop and slow down and rewind. Whether you're watching this live or later in time, I'll definitely spend some time to come back and check in on the comments. Would love to hear what you learned. If you have any questions, let me know. You can find me at Gemini Brett with twin T's, BRETT.com. I do this for a living. I love doing consultations. I love eclipse readings, astro mapping, all sorts of other things. And if you're into that kind of sacred astronomy approach, it's also something I teach, and I will be teaching for OPA, for the Organization for Professional Astrology, in this June or July of 2021. We'll have a sacred astronomy for astrologers certification course through OPA. So you can check in with them about that at opaastrology.org, where you can also find about the retreat where I'll be teaching astrolocality and mapping techniques in April of 2021. That retreat, of course, and I'm sad to say that and scared to say that, will be virtual. So wherever you are, I hope you're good. I hope you're staying true to yourself and your growth. And these strange times, we all knew some shit was going to go down, and here it is. And just because it's happening doesn't mean that it will happen for us unless we choose to happen with it. So whatever that means to you, may you go glad into that journey, and I hope to see you on earth on the other side. Thanks so much, Linda and Della and EA Zoom meetings. It's a treat to be here again, and I'll see you in space.